Hey everyone, welcome back to HFI Covenant. My name is Jennifer and I'll be narrating today's story. This is a completely original human-written work of science fiction. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's jump right in. The sentencing had been brief. That was the part Tarindra couldn't stop thinking about, even as the ocean swallowed her whole. After 400 years of dynastic tradition, after 17 generations of her bloodline holding the conclave seat, after everything, the Lord Arbiter had spent less than 3 minutes on the formalities. He had not even looked at her when he spoke. Exile to Olindos, immediate dispersal, no recovery. No recovery, that was the elegant, bureaucratic phrasing for what they were actually doing, which was murdering her in a way that kept their hands clean. Olindos was logged in the Galactic Survey as an uninhabited ocean world. Class 7 gravitational hazard. Surface pressure rated at 3.1 standard G. No formal colony. No rescue infrastructure. They had been dropping inconvenient people into its oceans for 2 centuries and calling it exile. Because technically, you weren't dead when you hit the water. You were just going to be, very soon. Tarindra broke the surface, gasping, the impact of her ejection pod splash still ringing through her bones. The escape capsule, a single-use ceramic shell designed to survive atmospheric entry but nothing else, had already cracked apart around her, its fragments sinking into the gray-green deep. She had approximately the emergency flotation collar around her neck and the clothes on her back, which were ceremonial silks, entirely unsuited to ocean survival. The gravity hit her like a physical blow. She had known, intellectually, that it would be bad. She had read the surveys. 3.1 G meant that her body, calibrated for Vaildry Prime's comfortable 0.87 standard, would feel approximately 3.5 times its own weight pressing down through every joint, every organ, every blood vessel. She had told herself she was prepared. She was not prepared. Her large tufted ears, the feature her tutors had always called her most expressive trait, the gold-furred feline ears that flattened or swiveled with every shift of her mood, pressed completely flat against her skull with the first real wave of gravitational nausea. Her vision went gold and blurry. Something deep in her thoracic cavity felt wrong in a way she had no medical vocabulary for. A grinding pressure behind her sternum that pulsed with every heartbeat. Her cardiovascular system simply unable to generate enough pressure to push blood adequately upward against the planet's insistence on pulling everything downward. She tried to swim. It was almost funny. Her arms, which she had always considered elegant and capable, moved through the water like they belonged to someone else. Leaden, imprecise, fighting a losing battle against a force that didn't care about her lineage or her learning or the 17 generations of her bloodline that had built an empire across 6 star systems. The ocean tasted of brine and something metallic. The sky above her was a flat gunmetal gray. Clouds stacked in heavy formations that suggested this world's weather was as indifferent to visitors as everything else about it. The waves were not large, but they didn't need to be. Each one that rolled over her felt like a stone wall. She went under for the first time, came up, went under again, and this time she wasn't sure she was going to come back up. Her legs had stopped cooperating. The flotation collar was keeping her head roughly at the surface, but her body hung beneath her like an anchor. The weight of herself in this gravity, a physical enemy she had no weapon against. Her golden eyes, wide and already clouding at the edges with the particular darkness of oxygen debt, fixed on the flat gray sky above the waterline, and she thought, with the strange clarity that comes right before the end of things, that she had wasted an enormous amount of time being contemptuous of the wrong species. Then something grabbed her. Not something, someone. A hand, large, calloused, with the kind of grip that didn't ask permission, closed around her upper arm and pulled. The motion was not gentle, it was efficient. She came out of the water in a single continuous arc, breaking the surface and clearing it entirely, and then she was deposited onto something solid with a thump that rattled every already protesting bone in her body. She lay there for a moment, simply existing, breathing, processing. The solid thing beneath her was a raft of some kind. A wide, flat platform of welded and lashed metal, riding low in the water, the surface textured with anti-slip grating. It smelled of machine oil, ozone, and salt. Somewhere nearby, an engine burbled at low idle. "Don't move yet," said a voice in Galactic Standard that carried an accent she didn't recognize. "Give yourself 30 seconds. Your vestibular system is trying to reboot." She turned her head anyway, because being told not to do something had never sat well with her, and regretted it immediately as the world tilted violently. She closed her eyes and waited, which was the most undignified thing she had done in recent memory, which itself was saying something given the last 6 hours. 30 seconds, the voice said again, not unkindly. "I counted. You've got 20 left." When she opened her eyes the second time, the world had mostly stopped moving, and she got her first proper look at the person who had pulled her out of the ocean. He was a human. She knew the species, had catalogued them even in the dry taxonomic way of someone who studied galactic civilizations academically, rather than personally. Homo sapiens, Terran origin, approximately 200,000 years of evolutionary development. Currently rated Class B emerging civilization, pre-FTL independent, frequently employed in frontier labor markets due to high adaptability threshold. She had written a paper once on the irony of a species so evolutionarily young, achieving such wide dispersal through sheer economic utility. She remembered using the phrase low-tier biological chassis in her introduction, and thinking herself quite clever for it. The human crouching beside her looked like someone had taken the concept of that phrase and systematically proven it wrong. He was not especially tall, perhaps 1.85 meters, which put him in the upper range of his species' average, but was unremarkable by galactic standards. What was remarkable was everything else. He was built with the kind of compact, dense musculature that came not from cosmetic augmentation, but from genuine sustained load-bearing, the sort of physical development that happened when a body spent years under conditions that should have broken it. His forearms, resting on his knees as he crouched, were corded with visible tendon and muscle, the skin over them tanned to a deep, weathered brown. His face was angular, sun-lined, with dark eyes that were currently assessing her with the same practical efficiency he'd used to pull her from the water. He was wearing a reinforced tactical vest, battered and grease-stained, over a long-sleeved thermal layer, cargo trousers with too many pockets, heavy boots with magnetic clips at the ankle, no gravity suit at all, which her brain noted and then immediately filed as impossible, and moved on from because there were more immediate concerns. Green skin, leaf patterns, tufted ears, golden eyes, he said, cataloging her as straightforwardly as she'd once cataloged his species. "You're Veldry, which means you just fell out of a dispersal pod, which means someone up there with a ship and a bad attitude wanted you gone." He tilted his head. "What did you do?" "I beg your pardon?" Her voice came out rougher than she intended, stripped of its usual imperious register by the business of nearly drowning. "It's not an accusation. Olindos is a dumping ground. Everyone here did something, including me." A brief, dry, almost smile. "My thing was trespassing in a restricted isotope field. What was yours?" She decided that full honesty was perhaps premature. "Political disagreement." He stood, which he did with easy fluidity. Just stood up from a crouch, under 3.1 G, the way she might stand up from a chair in her own palace, and moved to the raft's small control console. "Can you stay conscious?" "I am currently conscious." "That's not what I asked." He glanced back at her over his shoulder. "Because I need to move us before whoever dropped you decides to send a confirmation drone, and if you're going to black out from the gravity load, I need to know so I can strap you down first." Tarindra took a careful inventory of her body's current state. Her ears, she was dimly aware, had not moved from their flat against skull position since she hit the water. Her chest felt like someone had placed a moderately sized boulder on it. The grinding sensation behind her sternum had settled into a persistent, nauseating pressure. Her legs were still not entirely responding to commands. "I may need to remain horizontal for a time," she admitted, which was the closest she could currently get to "I cannot move, and I am in significant pain." "That's fine. The raft's flat." He turned back to the controls. The engine's idle deepened into a purposeful rumble. "My name's Luke Harrison, ghost scrapper, licensed and mostly law-abiding." A pause. "Welcome to Olindos. It's terrible." The raft began to move. Tarindra lay on the metal grating and looked at the gray sky, and tried to reconcile the evidence of her senses with everything she had previously believed about humans. He had pulled her from the water one-handed. He had not strained. He had not braced. He had simply reached down and extracted her from the ocean as though she weighed nothing, which under 3.1 g, she absolutely did not. Her ears twitched, just barely, fighting against the gravity that wanted them flat. Toward the sound of the engine. She had written a paper on humans once. She was beginning to suspect it had been very, very wrong. Luke's base was not what Tarindra would have called a base. It was an archipelago of salvage. 3 large platforms of welded hull plating, connected by ropes and magnetic grapples, anchored to something on the seafloor by cables that disappeared into the dark green water. On these platforms, arranged with an organizational logic that only made sense once you understood it, was the accumulated material of someone living very practically in a very hostile place. Fuel cells stacked in weather-sealed crates, salvaged equipment in various states of disassembly, a sleeping shelter built from the fuselage of something that might once have been an atmospheric shuttle, and everywhere in carefully labeled containers, the pale blue crystalline formations that she recognized after a moment as concentrated lithium-7 isotope. Worth per cubic gram, more than most frontier colonies produced in a year. "You've been here a while," she said, from the stretcher-like arrangement of salvage webbing that Luke had constructed for her on the main platform. The horizontal position helped. Not enough, but measurably. 8 months. He was doing something with a compact medical scanner, running it over her torso with the efficiency of someone who'd used one before. The isotope field under this section of ocean is one of the richest unmapped deposits in this sector. I found it by accident when my ship got caught in the gravity well during a survey pass. He paused, reading the scanner's output. Your 3rd and 4th ribs are stress fractured. Superficial, but they'll hurt. You've got vascular compression in your lower thoracic region, that's the chest pain, and your inner ear is genuinely confused. The good news is, none of it's immediately fatal. How reassuring. Better than the alternative. He set the scanner down and moved to a crate, retrieving what appeared to be a pharmaceutical kit. I've got gravity adaptation stimulants. Designed for humans, so the dosage will be different for you, but the mechanism works on most bilaterally symmetric species. It'll help your cardiovascular system compensate. He looked at her. I should tell you there's a small chance of allergic reaction. What is a small chance? Smaller than the chance of your heart giving out from vascular compression in the next 12 hours. Administer it, she said. He did with a competence that surprised her. The injection site correct. The dosage adjusted on the fly with a calculation she followed and confirmed was accurate. He had medical training then, or at least the self-taught equivalent that frontier workers often developed out of necessity. She filed this away. You said ghost scrapper, she said, while he worked. I'm familiar with licensed salvage operations. Ghost suggests something less official. Ghost means I'm here without a survey claim. He capped the injector. I found the deposit. I don't have the capital to file a legitimate claim with the Surveyors Guild, and if I report it, someone with deeper pockets will take it from me before I've pulled enough to make it worth the trip. So I'm pulling quietly and planning to file the claim once I have enough extracted to make a legal defense viable. A shrug. It's technically illegal. It's also the only play available to someone without corporate backing. She looked at him, at the salvaged platform, the careful organization, the months of solitary work under a gravitational load that should have been destroying him. And in 8 months you have not contacted anyone, requested extraction. Extraction costs money I don't have yet, and my comm equipment is local range only. He met her gaze steadily. The long-range transmitter I need is in the communications spire, about 40 hours travel from here, if the weather holds. The communications spire, she knew of it, a pre-colonial era relay station. One of the original survey installations from before Olindos was officially classified a death world and abandoned. If it still had power or could be given power, its signal would reach the major transit lanes. So you've been planning to reach it, she said. Eventually, when I had enough isotope extracted to make the trip worth interrupting the harvest. He looked at her steadily. You've accelerated my timeline, because whoever dropped me will send verification. Yes, she looked at the sky, which was beginning to darken toward a gray evening. Somewhere up there, beyond the cloud cover and the gravity well and the atmosphere, was the ship that had brought her here. The enforcer who had watched the Lord Arbiter's sentence carried out, who would send a drone within 24 hours, standard protocol, to confirm dispersal had been fatal. How long do we have, she asked. Before the drone? maybe 18 hours. He stood, looking at his base. At 8 months of work, the stacked isotope crates, the assembled survival infrastructure, with an expression that was carefully neutral. "I'll load what I can carry." "I am sorry," she said, and meant it, which surprised her. "For the loss of your work. It's not lost, just uncollectible for now." He was already moving, the motion fluid and purposeful under the weight that was making every breath she took a negotiated effort. "Rest. We leave at first light." She watched him work, lifting, securing, loading, and tried to remember the exact phrasing she had used in that paper. Low-tier biological chassis. She had meant it as a sociological observation, a clinical categorization. She was beginning to understand she had not known what she was looking at. The drone found them 7 hours into travel, which was faster than Luke had predicted and faster than Tarindra had hoped. She was propped against the raft's forward rail, the gravity stimulants having taken enough of the edge off that she could sit upright for limited periods without the chest pain becoming incapacitating. Her ears, she had regained perhaps 30% of their usual mobility, enough to angle them towards sounds. Caught the drone before Luke's instruments did, which she mentioned immediately. "Behind us, high-frequency harmonic, approximately 200 meters in closing." Luke didn't question it. He simply moved to the aft section of the raft, and what she had assumed was a mounted equipment crane revealed itself to be something else entirely. A heavy harpoon rig, the kind used in industrial ocean operations, modified and retensioned with what looked like doubled-gauge cable. He had built it himself, she realized, from salvage, in his spare time. The drone broke cloud cover 2 seconds later. It was a standard Veldry conformation model. Roughly spherical, the size of a large decorative urn, bristling with sensor arrays, and a single-use disintegration emitter for dealing with survivors who were inconveniently still alive. It was, in the context of Veldry technology, an unremarkable piece of equipment. Luke loaded the harpoon with the mechanical certainty of someone who had done it many times, took 2 seconds to track the drone's approach vector, and fired. What happened next reframed several of Tarindra's assumptions about kinetic physics in practical application. The harpoon crossed 200 meters in approximately a quarter second. Under 3.1 g, every kilogram of its mass was multiplied by 3.1 at the moment of impact, a physics fact that the drone's designers had clearly not accounted for when engineering its casing. The harpoon did not so much hit the drone as geometrically reallocate it. The casing sheared diagonally, the sensor arrays spun off in separate directions, the emitter housing tumbled into the ocean having never fired, and what remained of the drone's central chassis came down on the water in 4 distinct pieces. Tarindra stared. "Harpoon's better than a gun out here," Luke said, already reloading with the calm of someone discussing weather conditions. "Guns need propellant that I have to ration. The harpoon rig uses tension and counterweight, essentially free, and under this gravity, the kinetic energy at impact is substantial." He glanced at the debris on the water. Also quieter, electronically quieter, no discharge signature. "You sheared a military-grade sensor drone," she said, "with a cable and a pointed metal rod. Heavy-gauge cable, and the rod's tungsten cord." He checked the reload mechanism. "They'll know it was destroyed, but they won't know the method. Might buy us some confusion time." She thought about the emitter on that drone. The single-use disintegration emitter that, had it fired, would have confirmed her death cleanly and ended this whole situation. The fact that it had not fired was because Luke Harrison had calculated an intercept vector, accounted for gravitational effects on projectile mass, and put a tungsten cord spear through the conformation system before it could activate. Faster than the drone had expected anything on this planet to move. "You knew the drone would come," she said. "I've been on this planet 8 months. Drones come every couple of weeks to check the water. Survey sweeps mostly. I've had practice." He sat back down at the controls. "You should eat something. There's ration packs in the starboard crate. The blue ones are tolerable." She found the ration packs. She ate one, which was indeed tolerable if you define tolerable broadly. She watched the horizon and thought about what she had just seen. Not the destruction of the drone, but the ease of it. The complete absence of drama. A problem had presented itself, and Luke Harrison had solved it with available materials and a working understanding of physics, and then immediately returned to thinking about her nutrition. This, she was beginning to understand, was simply how he operated. He treated her fractured ribs that evening, with the raft anchored in the lee of a large debris field. The wreckage of an old survey station, semi-submerged, providing both shelter from the wind and electromagnetic cover from above. The treatment involved a bone-knit applicator, more from his salvage medical kit, and required her to remove the outer layer of her clothing, which she did with the pragmatism of someone who had larger concerns than propriety. The leaf pattern markings on her green skin, she was dimly aware, were standing out with unusual clarity. A Veildre physiological stress response. The pigment darkening under duress. Luke worked with the same careful efficiency he applied to everything. She studied him while he worked, because she was a scholar and observation was her default response to new information. "You're not wearing a gravity suit," she said finally. The words had been cued since the first moment she'd seen him. "Nope, that is not possible. No unaugmented biological species can—" "Humans are from Earth," he said, without looking up from the applicator. "Earth is a 1.0 G planet, which sounds average, right? But most of the habitable worlds in this sector run between 0.6 and 0.9 G. Veildre Prime is 0.87. Cathera is 0.71. Luminar Station, the big transit hub, is built to 0.65 G, because that's where most of the galactic population is comfortable." He glanced up briefly. "Humans are the outlier. We evolved heavy. That still does not account for 3.1 G. No, 1.0 doesn't get you to 3.1. But humans also have two other things." He set the applicator to its secondary setting. 1. We have the highest cortical override of pain response of any sapient species currently cataloged. We can choose not to stop. Most species have a neurological shutoff. When the pain and stress hits a certain threshold, the body forces cessation. Humans have that shutoff too. We've just spent 200,000 years learning to ignore it. He paused. And 2. High G exposure, over time, does to human physiology what it can't do to most others. It upregulates. Our bone density increases. Our cardiovascular output compensates. Our bodies read gravity as load-bearing exercise and respond to it. He looked at her steadily. "I have been on this planet for 8 months. I started the first month barely able to lift the heavy equipment. Now," he moved the applicator along her rib cage with a control so precise it was almost gentle. "Now I can do things I shouldn't be able to do." Tarindra lay still and processed this. "The hysterical strength instances," she said slowly. Hysterical strength was a catalogued human phenomenon, documented cases of humans performing feats of physical power far beyond calculated biological limits in moments of extreme stress. She had read about it in the context of emergency medicine. It had always seemed like an interesting anomaly. "You're saying those are not anomalies. I'm saying that under the right conditions, what humans call hysterical strength is more like a reserve tank that most of us never access because we don't need to. Our bodies cap themselves under normal conditions because full output would be damaging. But the limiter can come off." He finished with the applicator and sat back. 8 months of 3.1 G has recalibrated my baseline. My bone density is approximately double what it was when I arrived. My cardiovascular output is, well, my heart rate at rest right now is 58 beats per minute, which sounds normal, but the volume per beat is not normal. He paused, seeming to search for how to explain it. "I'm built like my heart is a pump for a much larger machine." She looked at him, really looked. Not the cataloging assessment of the first hours, but something more searching. At the density of him, the economy of his movement, the way he occupied space under a gravitational load that was actively trying to kill her. And she thought about the 17 generations of her bloodline, who had built an empire across 6 star systems, who had developed energy weapons and gravity manipulation technology and faster-than-light travel. "We categorized you as low tier," she said quietly. "Your species." "I know, I've read the surveys." He said it without rancor. "We were studying the wrong metrics." She heard the admission in her own voice and didn't try to soften it. "We measured technological development. We measured cultural complexity and FTL capability and energy weapon yield. We did not measure what the body can do when it's forced to." He picked up the medical kit and began repacking it. "Yeah, that's a common mistake with humans. We look behind the curve because we're young and we don't have the tech. But the biology—" He almost smiled. "The biology has been under development a lot longer than the civilization." Her ears moved, Not much. She still lacked full mobility, but enough to angle forward, toward him. An attention signal, among her people, the involuntary kind. "How long until we reach the spire?" she asked. 30 hours if the weather holds. He looked at the sky. "Sleep if you can. Tomorrow will be harder." She slept, for the first time on this planet, without being certain she would wake up. She woke up. The raft was moving. Luke was at the controls, a silhouette against a gray dawn. And he had not slept. And this too she filed away as data she was only beginning to know how to read. The communications spire was not supposed to be submerged. Tarindra had accessed the original survey data on the raft's local system during the approach. Old files, pre-colonial, the kind of thing that ended up in public archives, simply because no one had thought to restrict information about a planet no one cared about. The spire had been built on a promontory, a rocky outcropping that rose 4 meters above mean sea level. In the centuries since the original survey, Olindo's mean sea level had risen. The promontory was still there, visible as a darker patch beneath the water, but the base of the spire, the communications array, the power coupling, the external access panels, was 6 meters down. Luke stood at the raft's edge and looked at the green dark water without speaking for a moment. "The transmitter module is in the base housing," he said. "I need to get to it to reroute the signal to the spire's upper antenna array. The antenna's still above water. See it?" He pointed, and she could, just barely, make out the upper section of the spire rising from the ocean's surface perhaps 40 meters away. A rust-streaked tower with the distinctive cross-lattice of a long-range relay array at its peak. But without activating the base coupling, the antenna's just a metal tower. "The pressure at 6 meters on this planet," she said, calculating, "would be about twice what you'd experience at the same depth on a standard G world." "Yeah." He was already pulling equipment from a sealed crate. A dive mask, a compressed air unit, a toolkit in a waterproof housing. For most species, 6 meters under 3.1 G surface pressure means probable internal hemorrhage from the compression gradient. Eardrums rupture around 3 meters. Vascular integrity starts compromising around 4. He looked at the kit. "For me, right now, with my current baseline, it'll be uncomfortable. You've done this before, not here, but I've done deep salvage on 2 other heavy G worlds." He checked the air unit's pressure reading. "The key is controlled descent, equalization on the way down, and not panicking. Panic elevates heart rate and oxygen consumption. You want your heart rate low." She looked at him. "How do you lower your heart rate deliberately?" "Practice." He glanced at her. "I'm going to need you up here monitoring my dive timer and watching for surface contacts. Can you stand?" She tested her legs, which had been improving incrementally since the stimulant and the bone knit treatment. She could stand, she discovered, if she treated it as a deliberate project. She gripped the raft's rail and got upright, which took effort she was not going to describe in detail, and nodded. "Tell me exactly what to watch for," she said. He told her. He was precise and quick about it. Surface contacts would appear as irregular reflections on the water. Drone overflights would carry an acoustic signature her ears would catch before his instruments. His dive timer should not exceed 12 minutes for the first descent, because that was his calculated oxygen window at high G exertion depth. If he was not back at 12 minutes, she was to drop the emergency marker. "And if you don't surface after the emergency marker?" He looked at her for a moment. "Then you activate the manual flare from the green kit in the port crate. International distress. Someone will eventually come." He paused. "It would take a while." "I see. I'll be back in 12 minutes, he said, and went over the side. She counted. It was the only useful thing she could do, besides watch the water and watch the sky, and hold herself upright against a gravity that treated every minute of vertical posture as a negotiation. She counted seconds, which kept a part of her mind occupied and prevented that part from calculating odds she didn't want calculated. The water above where he'd descended was murky green-gray, nothing visible past 2 meters. Olindos's ocean, she had gathered from Luke's notes on the local system, supported substantial aquatic life. The isotope-rich water created unusual biosystems, things adapted to extreme pressure and low light. Luke had mentioned, briefly and without apparent concern, that some of those things were large. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, the water below the dive site erupted briefly, a churning disturbance that sent a ring of displaced surface foam outward, then went still, then erupted again, more violently. Her ears went rigid. She did not have a weapon. She had Luke's monitoring instruments, the dive timer, and her own judgment, which told her that a medium-large subsurface disturbance, followed by a larger one, meant that something down there had found Luke Harrison and was discovering that this had been a miscalculation. The water settled. At 6 minutes, a stream of bubbles rose to the surface. At 7 minutes, 43 seconds. She knew the exact moment because she was counting. Luke's head broke the surface. He was pulling himself up the raft's access ladder one-handed, his other hand clamped around the toolkit housing. He swung over the rail with the same fluid economy he brought to every movement, and she saw two things simultaneously. The toolkit was secured and apparently undamaged, and there was a long diagonal gash across his left forearm, already closing around the edges in the way that deep pressure wounds sometimes did. "What happened?" she said. "Something big took issue with my presence near what was apparently its den." He set the toolkit down and examined his arm with brief clinical interest. "I took issue with its teeth being in my arm. We reached an understanding." He looked up. "The coupling housing is accessible. I can reach the transmitter module on the second dive." "Are you tracking surface contacts?" "Nothing overhead, nothing on the water." She looked at his arm. "You require treatment after the second dive." He was already checking the air unit's remaining pressure. "Luke," she said his name deliberately, having not used it before. It stopped him. "Sit for 2 minutes. Let your heart rate come down. You said that was the key variable." He looked at her for a moment, assessing, she thought, whether this was concern or tactical sense, or both. Then he sat. She found the medical kit. She cleaned and sealed the gash on his arm herself, with hands that were steadier than she'd expected, and tried not to think about what it meant that her hands were steady, while her chest still ached with every breath. 60 seconds more, she said, when he moved to stand. He waited the 60 seconds. The second dive took 9 minutes and 40 seconds. When he came back up, he had the transmitter module's rerouting relay in the toolkit, sealed in a waterproof case, and he was grinning, a sudden, unguarded expression that completely reorganized his face into something younger and considerably less weathered. "Got it," he said. Her ears swiveled fully forward for the first time since she'd hit the water. She heard the landing craft before the instruments did, which was becoming a pattern. The Gravity Null ship was a veiled reinforcement class cutter, capable of independent G-field generation, which meant its crew experienced their comfortable 0.87 G, regardless of what the planet outside was doing. It set down on the water 50 meters from the spire, using the null field to hold itself stable, and from it came one figure. The Enforcer was tall, in the elongated way of species that had evolved under low gravity, nearly 2.5 meters, with the pale silver-blue coloration of the Veil-Dry military caste. The localized gravity nullification suit was evident in the almost contemptuous ease with which the Enforcer moved. A personal field generator integrated into the armor, creating a bubble of corrected gravity around a 2-meter radius. Within that bubble, this world's murder weight was nothing. Outside it, even a meter beyond its edge, 3.1 G would hit like a wall. Luke had gone up the spire's access stairs with the relay module. Tarindra was on the raft, which was secured to the spire's base. She was between the Enforcer and the spire entrance, which was not where she had intended to be. "Tarindra Val Aishan," the Enforcer said, using her full formal name with the flat intonation of someone reading a file. "Confirmed survival of dispersal event. Redispersal authorized." The Enforcer moved toward the raft with the easy stride of someone whose gravity had been corrected, and Tarindra did what she could, which was put herself between the Enforcer and the spire entrance, because Luke needed 3 more minutes to install the relay module. She did not kid herself about her combat capability. She was injured, in a gravitational environment that was still actively damaging her, and she had no weapons. What she had was a body in the Enforcer's path and a willingness to be as inconvenient as possible. She grabbed the nearest piece of unsecured salvage, a heavy tension rod, 2 meters long, and swung it, which cost her a great deal in terms of the fractured ribs, and produced an impact across the Enforcer's forearm that rang up her own arms like striking a stone wall. The Enforcer looked at the arm, looked at her. "You are causing yourself injury." Yes, she agreed and swung again. The backhand that sent her into the raft's railing was almost casual, the enforcer not bothering to calculate the force needed, which meant too much force was applied, which meant she hit the railing, bounced off it, and ended up on the deck with the gravity sitting on her chest like something alive and malicious. Her vision went gold at the edges. The tension rod was somewhere she couldn't see. Primitive world, the enforcer said, stepping over her. Primitive companion, it is almost poetic that your last hours were spent relying on the lowest-rated biology in the catalogued sector. Tarindra thought from the deck about that phrase. Lowest-rated biology. She thought about what she had watched over the last 30 hours. The harpoon, the diving, the second dive with a gash in his arm, and a heart rate he had controlled by decision. 8 months of 3.1 G, not as an ordeal, but as a recalibration. She thought, the enforcer has not met Luke yet. She was, despite everything, almost looking forward to the next 30 seconds. He came out of the ocean. He had not come down the stairs. Tarindra processed this later. Luke must have heard the ship's landing, or her fall against the railing, or both, and made a decision that the stairs were too exposed and too slow. He had exited through the spire's base access, which was still technically 6 meters below the surface, and come up through the water on the far side of the raft. And he came over the rail not like a man climbing out of the ocean, but like something launched from it. The enforcer turned at the sound. Luke was already moving. What happened in the next 45 seconds was, from Tarindra's position on the deck, mostly a matter of sound and impact vibration, because she could not lift her head sufficiently to follow it. But she could hear it, and she could feel it through the raft's metal deck, and she had enough data points by now to reconstruct it. Luke hit the enforcer without breaking stride, which meant the enforcer's null field met a mass of approximately 95 kilograms, moving at a velocity that the null field had not been designed to account for as kinetic input. The null field corrected for gravity. It did not correct for impact force. The enforcer went back 2 steps, which for an enforcer, accustomed to being the largest and heaviest thing in any room, was apparently startling enough to cause a tactical pause. Luke used the tactical pause. He had identified the null field generator immediately. She heard him say, in a voice that was not particularly elevated in affect, "There," and then heard the sharp mechanical protest of something being forcibly relocated. The enforcer's suit had integrated the generator at the shoulder housing, which was clever design for protection against environmental elements, but made it directly accessible to someone tall enough and strong enough to reach it, which Luke, in this moment, was. The null field collapsed with a sound like a pressure seal failing. Olindos's gravity, which had been patiently waiting outside the enforcer's bubble this whole time, arrived. The enforcer was 2.5 meters tall, mass optimized for low G, with a skeletal structure built for a 0.87 world. 3.1 G hit that skeletal structure simultaneously from every angle. The enforcer went to hands and knees instantly, the combat armor crumpling at the joints where it was never designed to bear this load, and made a sound that Tarindra recognized because she had made something very similar when she hit the water. Luke stepped back and let the planet do the rest. He stood there, wet, gashed arm reopened from the exertion, breathing steadily, and watched the enforcer become familiar with the reality that had been here all along, waiting for anyone arrogant enough to think a piece of technology could fully insulate them from it. Then he crossed to Tarindra and crouched beside her. "Relay modules installed," he said. "We need to go up." "The enforcer won't be a problem. Their ship has an automatic emergency extraction protocol. It'll detect the null field collapse and initiate rescue retrieval. They'll be back in their home G within an hour." He looked at her. "I'm not leaving anyone to die on this planet, even people who came here to kill you." She stared at him. "That surprises you," he said. "Yes," she said honestly. "We've got time to discuss your assumptions about human character later." He slid an arm under her, gentle with the ribs, and helped her to her feet. "Stairs now. You've been horizontal long enough." The stairs were 42 steps from base to transmitter platform. She knew this because she counted them, the same way she'd counted Luke's dive seconds. Because counting was useful, and because it gave her something to do other than simply survive each step individually. For her, 42 negotiations, 42 moments of convincing her body that the next step was possible, that the weight sitting on every joint was not, in fact, the end. that her cardiovascular system could push enough blood upward to keep her moving. Her ears were flat again. The leaf pattern markings on her skin had deepened to near black, with stress response. For Luke, 42 steps at a pace he was clearly moderating for her benefit. He stayed 1 step behind and 1 step to her right, not holding her but positioned to catch her if needed. And she was simultaneously grateful for the positioning and aware of what it cost him to move slowly when his body was clearly capable of taking these stairs at a run. "Tell me something," she said, at step 19. Because talking used air she could arguably not spare, but also kept her system from focusing entirely on the pain. "What do you want to know?" "What you planned to do before I arrived. Long term." A pause. 2 steps. Extract enough isotope to file the claim legally. Use the claim revenue to buy a survey ship. Do it properly the next time. Another step. There are 4 other potential deposits in this sector I identified during my survey pass. If the first one is as rich as I think, the claim revenue funds the whole operation. "A one-man isotope empire," she said. "A sustainable one." She could hear the dry, almost smile in his voice. "I don't need an empire. I need enough to work without being squeezed out by the people who already have empires." Step 27. The transmitter platform was visible above them, the lattice of the relay array casting angular shadows in the gray afternoon light. "My political disagreement," she said. "The reason I was exiled. You haven't asked." "No. You're not curious?" "I'm curious," he said. "I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to." She considered the nature of the thing that had ended her dynasty and her freedom, and thought about how to compress it into something that could be said on a staircase. The Conclave has been negotiating a resource extraction agreement with the Kethara Confederation for 11 years. The agreement, as written, would give Kethara access rights to 6 systems, currently inhabited by non-affiliated species who have not been consulted. She took a careful breath. "I published a legal analysis arguing that the agreement violated 3 separate tenets of the Galactic Compact's foundational charter. The Lord Arbiter's family has been the primary architect of the agreement for a decade." Step 34. "My analysis was correct. That was the problem." Silence for 3 steps. "So you told the truth about something powerful people were profiting from," Luke said. "In the most public forum available to a sitting conclave member, yes." Another step. "And they exiled you to a death world." "Yes." "And your analysis is still out there? Published?" "Every conclave session is logged in the Galactic Public Record. They cannot unpublish it without—" She understood what he was asking. "Without proving that the record itself was altered, which would be a larger legal catastrophe than the analysis." "So the analysis is still out there," he said. "And if someone with access to a long-range transmitter and a neutral platform were to make sure it got forwarded to the right people in the Compact's foundational court." Step 42. They were on the transmitter platform. Luke moved to the relay interface he'd spent 20 minutes installing from the bottom of an alien ocean, and his hands on the controls were steady. And Tarindra thought about the difference between what she had expected this planet to be, her death, the efficient erasure of an inconvenience, and what it had actually been. "Are you familiar with the Compact's foundational court routing address?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I expect you are." She came to stand beside him at the console, close enough that she could see the interface. Her hands, when she raised them to the inputs, did not shake. "I'll need 5 minutes to compose the transmission properly. Legal formatting, embedded timestamps, the public record citation codes. Take 10, he said. I'll run the beacon call for the freighter at the same time." She composed the transmission carefully, because she was a scholar and because it might be the most important document she had ever produced. And she was aware as she did it that the relay array's carrier signal was being generated by equipment that a human scrapper had installed from the bottom of an ocean while something large tried to take his arm off. And she thought this was perhaps the most improbable legal filing in the history of the Galactic Compact. She sent it. Luke sent the beacon. They stood on the transmitter platform and watched the gray sky of Olindos and waited. "The freighter will take approximately 9 hours, Luke said. "Yes." She looked at the horizon, where the ocean met the cloud cover in a line of flat pewter. Her ears had risen slightly from their flat skull position. "Not entirely, but enough. I owe you a significant debt." "No," the word was immediate and unambiguous. "You were in the water. I pulled you out. That's the start and end of the accounting. You lost 8 months of... The isotope will still be there, The claim can still be filed. He looked at her. You sent a transmission that might protect 6 systems of people who had no one arguing for them. I think that probably outweighs my harvest schedule. She looked at him for a long moment. This human who had no gravity suit and no corporate backing and no dynastic history, who had spent 8 months alone under a weight that should have crushed him and had instead been, quietly and entirely without drama, becoming something the galaxy's taxonomists had no category for. Your species, she said, is going to surprise a great many people. We usually do, he said. And this time the smile wasn't almost. It was full and real and entirely unguarded. And it transformed his weathered face in a way that made her ears swivel forward without any conscious decision on her part. The gray sky of Olindos did not care. The ocean stretched out in every direction, vast and heavy and indifferent. The relay array above them hummed with the ghost of her transmission, already traveling at light speed toward courts that did not yet know they had a case. Somewhere in the water below, the enforcer's ship was executing its emergency extraction protocol. Somewhere above the cloud cover, a neutral human freighter was turning toward a beacon it had not expected to receive from this world. They sat down on the transmitter platform, side by side in the gray afternoon, and waited. The freighter was called the Meridian Constant, out of Callisto Station, crewed by 12 humans and 3 affiliated species. And it arrived 8 hours and 40 minutes after the beacon, which was 20 minutes ahead of Luke's estimate, which she chose not to comment on. The extraction was not elegant. The freighter couldn't land on the ocean. It wasn't built for water operations, but it had a cargo shuttle, and the cargo shuttle had a medic, and the medic took one look at Tarindra, and another look at the gravity readings, and began doing things with a seriousness that suggested she had been more damaged than she'd allowed herself to fully register. She was, it turned out, moderately more damaged than she'd allowed herself to fully register. The freighter's medical bay was a modest room by the standards of dedicated hospital ships, but it had a gravity compensator running at 0.9 standard, and the moment Tarindra crossed into that field, every muscle in her body unclenched simultaneously. It was involuntary, like being lowered into warm water. She made a sound she would not repeat in polite company. Yeah, said Luke from the doorway, where he was getting his forearm retreated by the medic's assistant. First few minutes in compensated G after heavy world exposure are like that. She was on a cot. This seemed reasonable. The medic, a compact young woman named Reyes, who had the efficient calm of someone who had dealt with frontier injuries at her entire career, was running a proper diagnostic scanner, the kind that would produce actual data rather than Luke's admirably improvised field assessments. 3 stress fractures, 2 healed, Reyes said, in the tone of someone itemizing a list. Residual vascular compression, improving. Muscular microtrauma, extensive but non-critical. You've got the bruising profile of someone who went a few rounds with a planet. A pause. Which is apparently accurate. Accurate, Tarindra confirmed. Reyes gave her something that would help the healing, and then, in the way of good medics everywhere, left her alone with the information that she needed rest. Luke came in when Reyes was gone and sat in the chair beside the cot, and they were quiet for a moment in the way of 2 people who have been in continuous motion and are only now, in the stillness, beginning to calculate what they've actually been through. The isotope claim, she said. I'll file it through the freighter's legal relay. Captain Osei has dealt with ghost scrapper filings before. It's common enough in this sector. He looked at his rebandaged arm. Without the physical presence there, I'll need to establish proof of prior discovery. I have 8 months of extraction logs. I can provide a conclave-level attestation of your discovery claim, she said. Or I could if my conclave membership hasn't been formally revoked. A pause. Actually, I believe it cannot be formally revoked without a full tribunal vote, and the Lord Arbiter will be somewhat preoccupied with the foundational court inquiry I've just initiated. She considered this. My membership may be more intact than he intended. Luke looked at her. That would significantly improve my claim filing, he said. Yes, she agreed. It would. They were quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The kind that was making room for something that hadn't been named yet. Her ears were fully upright now, for the first time since she'd hit the water. They were angled, without her deciding they should be, in his direction. He was looking at the small porthole set into the medical bay's wall, through which was visible a rectangle of stars. The first stars she'd seen since the cloud cover of Olindos had replaced the sky she was used to. Out here, with the freighter's compensated gravity and the diagnostic scanner's quiet hum and the distance between her and the water world growing with every moment, the stars looked like what they were, not the map of her family's empire or the backdrop for the politics that had nearly killed her, but simply the galaxy going on. "You called your people unintended super soldiers," she said. "Earlier, when you were explaining the biology, I was paraphrasing a xenobiologist's assessment from a paper published about 10 years ago by a researcher at the University of Cathara." A slight pause. "It was considered an interesting fringe theory at the time. I would like to read it. I have a copy on my data drive." He glanced at her. "I also have apparently significantly more empirical evidence to add to its thesis than was available to the original author. 8 months of evidence. And whatever the last 30 hours count for." The stars in the porthole shifted slightly as the freighter adjusted course, and somewhere in that adjustment, the rectangle of visible space tilted to show a cluster she recognized. The Asian Reach, the fringe systems of her family's territory, where there were people who had received her transmission and were now in some legal chamber she couldn't see, beginning to understand that the exile of a conclave member on questionable grounds, combined with the suppression of a legal analysis that was also now public record, combined with a foundational court inquiry, she stopped thinking about it. That was future Tarindra's concern. Present Tarindra was in a medical bay with compensated gravity and a fractured rib healing protocol, and a human who had caught her when the ocean let go. "When the claim is filed," she said, "and when the inquiry resolves, both of which will take some time, where do you intend to go?" He thought about it. She watched his face in the process, which took longer than she expected and was more considered than she'd anticipated. "Back," he said finally. "There are 4 other potential deposits in that sector. I told you." "You told me." She was quiet for a moment. "The Valdry Empire's legal apparatus has a significant number of restricted access survey documents that might be relevant to identifying further deposits." Another pause. "I have unrestricted access to those documents as a sitting conclave member." He looked at her, the dark eyes that had catalogued her on a rain-gray ocean, green skin, leaf patterns, tufted ears, golden eyes, catalogued her again now, in a warm-lit medical bay, and the assessment was not the same as the first one. "Are you suggesting a business arrangement?" he said. "I'm suggesting," she said carefully, "that the galaxy is considerably larger than either of us has yet had the opportunity to explore, and that exploring it would be more effective with complementary capabilities." She held his gaze. "You have capabilities I previously failed to correctly categorize. And you have capabilities I don't have," he said. "Access, legal expertise, institutional knowledge." A slight pause. 17 generations of galactic history, give or take. Her ears tilted, just slightly, forward and to the side. The angle, in Valdry body language. That meant something more than professional interest, and less than declaration. The tentative middle space, where things began without being announced. "You did not have to pull me out of that ocean. I was there," he said simply. "Yes," she said, "you were." The stars continued to move past the porthole, steady and unhurried, and the freighter's compensated gravity held them both at 0.9 standard, which was comfortable for her and slightly lower than Luke's long-acclimated baseline, which meant that for the first time on this journey, he was in an environment gentler than the one that had made him. She thought he probably didn't notice. She thought the galaxy's taxonomists, who had spent 20 years cataloging humans as a Class B emerging civilization with a low-tier biological chassis, also probably didn't notice, and wouldn't, until something made them look more carefully. She had written a paper once that used that phrase. She thought, looking at the stars and at Luke Harrison, who had caught her when the ocean let go, that she might write a better one. There was a great deal of time before they reached the nearest transit hub. There was a data drive somewhere with a xenobiologist paper on it, and the stars were moving past the porthole in steady succession. And the galaxy was enormous and full of unexplored things, and Tarindra Val Ashen, exiled princess, sitting conclave member, scholar of galactic history, had begun, with considerable interest, to revise her understanding of what it meant to be human. Her ears were fully forward now. She thought Luke noticed. She thought, from the way the dry, almost smile that had transformed his face earlier was making a quiet return, that he didn't mind. The Meridian Constant sailed on through the dark between stars, outbound from a water world that had tried to kill both of them, carrying them toward every